we have Michelle Rizal from Chainalysis. She is the Senior Training Specialist there and a former law enforcement investigator. And I hope, Michelle, you are able to dive deep into some of your experiences in law enforcement. Michelle supports agencies across APAC to build capability in cryptocurrency investigations, digital asset tracing, and evidentiary decision making. So this session is going to focus on how blockchain analytics platforms map transaction flows, how they identify suspicious activity, and how they support real-world investigation. So, Michelle, I'm going to bring you up to the stage to show that visibility that underpins how activity is tracked and understood.
Thank you for the introduction, Amy Rose. I appreciate it. I'm just trying to thank you so much, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone here for having me here. And today I want to just sort of pull the curtain back on blockchain analytics. We're not doing marketing here, but the practical reality of actually what happens when someone, loses their money especially to a crypto scam, and what investigators actually do, and the honest truth about, when assets can and can't be recovered. So I'm going to walk through, real investigative methodology here. No tools, just a high-level view, and share limitations as well that don't always make the front page. Like with everything we do here at Chainalysis, I must say that we have a legal disclaimer, which is that the content for informational purposes is only for informational purposes, right? And it's not to provide legal, compliance, tax, or financial investment advice. So we encourage to consult your own advisors in regards to reiterate that Chainalysis is not responsible. So that's just one of the things I have to always cover. So thank you again. And so this is me. I'm Michelle Rizal. I'm based in Cairns, but I'm currently in Canberra right now, delivering some training here. I have over 22 years of law enforcement background, and I'm an ex-prosecutor as well as being an ex-detective. And thank you for having me here. So today this is my agenda for this session. It's designed to give you guys a practical view of, like I said, of what happens after a crypto scam and how blockchain analytics is used. I will cover why this issue matters and why blockchain transactions can be traced at all. And also how analytics works in practice and what typically happens once a scam is reported. And lastly, I will also address the limits of tracing, the reality of recovery and, what these issues actually mean for professionals working across compliance, investigations, governance, and legal practice. So hopefully by the end of this session, you guys will have some understanding of, how blockchain tracing works. I'm not going to read out my objectives, but before we actually dive in, I do have a structure of this, so please bear with me. The purpose, like I said, is to give you guys a practical and realistic understanding of blockchain analytics. So this is not about tracing, it is about understanding what can be observed on chain and what can actually be reasonably inferred. Where legal and procedural mechanisms become essential and why recovery is often much harder than people actually expect. Now, here, this is about scale and relevance, right? As you see on the left-hand side, the left are the global figures drawn from our Chainalysis crypto crime report, which shows, the scale of illicit activity and, the growing role of stable coins in illicit transaction flows. Importantly, while absolute figures are significant, illicit activity still represents less than 1% of attributed crypto transaction volume. So this issue, still needs to be framed accurately. So on the right-hand side, we've got the Australian picture here, based on reporting from ACCC, ScamWatch, and Anti-Scam Centre. Those figures show that scam losses remain substantial, with investment scams continuing to drive major losses and scam-related harm still affecting, Australians at scale. Now, the reason blockchain can be traced is simple in principle, right? So even if the analysis becomes complex in practice, most blockchains, record transactions on a public ledger. Okay, so that means transfers between addresses are visible and they're time-stamped and permanently recorded. Unlike traditional banking, where transaction visibility is usually fragmented across institutions, blockchain activity can often be followed, from one address to the next in a, continuous transaction trail. So that gives investigators and analysts, something very valuable, a transparent history of movement. But there is an important limitation, right? Blockchain addresses are usually pseudonymous. Okay, so that they're not automatically tied to a real world identity. So, while we can often observe what happened on chain, that doesn't by itself, tell us who controlled an address, why they acted, or whether the funds can realistically be recovered. Now, that distinction is really important. Now, blockchain analytics creates that visibility and tracing opportunities, but it doesn't actually remove, the need for attribution, the legal process, intelligence, or even, the evidentiary discipline. Blockchain analytics is not one single action either. It is a combination of methods used to turn visible blockchain data into something operationally useful. Now, this step is often, clustering, and that means identifying groups of addresses that appear to be associated with the same service, entity, or actor. So looking at a single address in isolation can actually can be misleading. But if you look at the broader pattern of related activity, it's usually far more informative. Okay, the second step there is attribution. This is where analysts connect observed activity to known services or entities, such as exchanges, illicit services, merchant services even, and other, identified infrastructure. Attribution is very powerful, but it is important to treat it carefully, right? It supports analysis, but it doesn't actually remove, the need for corroboration. Now, the third step there is tracing. So this means, following funds from one address or transaction to the next, sometimes across multiple hops, and in some cases across multiple blockchains. And finally, there is context. That includes behavioral analysis like timing, transaction patterns, and open source intelligence. Now, this is often where suspicious activity becomes more visible, right? Because the question is no longer, where the funds move to, but whether the behavior around that movement is unusual or risky or, consistent with known illicit patterns. I guess the key point is, that analytics helps structure what is in fact visible on chain. Now, from a chain analysis perspective, that means, combining visible fund flows with attribution, behavioral context, and risk indicators to, better understand whether the activity appears suspicious or not. Okay, it doesn't replace, just want to reiterate this, judgment, legal process, or evidentiary discipline. And, once a scam is reported, the process usually begins with the basics, right? So gathering the transaction details, identifying the receiving wallet, and then screening the activity for any known service or risk or existing attribution. Now, from there, the focus shifts, right, from to tracing. The analysts follow the movement of funds to understand whether they, where they actually went, whether they were split or they were consolidated, swapped, bridged, or moved into a service. So the practical aim is to identify a useful, intervention point, like custodial exchange or another service where compliance action, legal process, or investigative engagement may actually be possible. Now, this is the key point here. The value of blockchain analytics is not just, that it shows movement. It is that it helps convert, that movement into something operationally useful. But that, outcome still depends on, again, timing, cooperation, legal authority, and, what sits at the other end of that transaction trail. Again, from our perspective, this is the point where tracing starts to actually matter operationally, because it, helps show, where action may actually become possible. Okay, so this is where expectations need to be managed, very carefully. Blockchain tracing is powerful because it can show how funds moved, and reveal those transaction patterns and identify interactions with known services or infrastructure. Now, that can support triage, escalation, compliance action, investigative leads, and legal processes. But it does have its limits, right? It doesn't by itself establish who controlled an address. It doesn't establish why someone actually acted. It doesn't guarantee, that assets can be restrained, and it certainly doesn't guarantee recovery. Okay, so that is really important. Excuse me. So tracing is best, I guess, understood, at an evidentiary and intelligence capability. So it helps, reconstruct what is observable on chain and identify where action may be possible, right? So the legal operational outcome still depends on attribution, corroboration, timing, jurisdiction, and cooperation across various organizations. The reality of recovery, right? Recovery is often the question people care most about, but it's usually the hardest part of this whole story. Okay, even where funds can be traced clearly, that doesn't actually mean they can be frozen, seized, or even returned, right? So this funnel here is a useful way to actually think about it. So funds may be traceable, meaning we can actually follow where they move to, and some of those cases become actionable, where there is a service or institution or even a point of contact who is able to respond. But only a smaller set become recoverable, right? Where legal authority, cooperation, timing, and control of the funds kind of all align together. And that is why recovery needs to be framed honestly, right? Because traceable doesn't always mean recoverable. Even so, right, tracing still has real value. It can support disruption, generate those investigative leads, identify patterns across, victims, and strengthen those legal and compliance actions, even, where asset recovery isn't possible. I guess for investigators, right, the key lesson is speed. Early reporting, preservation of transaction data, and, rapid identification of actionable, points can actually improve the chances of disruption or restraint. Now, for compliance and governance professionals, tracing should be understood as a decision support capability. It helps identify risk, prioritize response, and inform escalation. But it works best, when organizations already have a clear pathway for those incident response and legal engagements and operational coordination. Now, for legal professionals and judiciary, the important point is evidentiary discipline. Blockchain tracing can show movement and support inference, but it shouldn't really be confused with proof of identity, proof of control, or proof of intent, right? So those conclusions usually require corroboration and again, context and careful legal framing. Now, across all of these roles, the common message really is that, blockchain analytics is highly valuable, but, the value depends on how well it's actually interpreted, how it's acted on and integrated into those broader legal operational processes. Just to close, the key message I'm trying to get at is blockchain creates an unusually visible record of financial movement, right? And it gives investigators, compliance teams, lawyers, regulators, and decision makers those powerful starting points. But visibility alone is not the outcome, right? The real challenge really is, turning that visibility into action that is timely, disciplined, and defensible. Okay, so that means understanding what tracing can actually show, what it can't show on its own, and where legal cooperation and professional judgment remain really essential. That is the practical value of blockchain analytics, and not just seeing movement, but using that visibility responsibly and effectively as well. And that's me in a nutshell. Thank you, Amy Rose. I hope I kept in time.
You did amazing. Thanks so much, Michelle.